The room was thick with tension after I laid out the evidence. Proof of Mrs. Parker's misuse of power, her favoritism, and her blatant disregard for the rules. The neighbors stared, some in anger, others in disbelief. Mrs. Parker's face was pale, eyes darting around as if searching for an escape. But I wasn't backing down. I took a step closer and spoke with quiet authority. "This isn't just about my pool," I said. "It's about fairness, about all of us standing up to someone who's been abusing her position. We've let her get away with this long enough." Suddenly a voice broke through the murmurs. It was Mr. Evans, one of the more reserved board members. "I've reviewed the bylaws," he said, voice steady, "and I see now that many of her actions are not only unfair but legally questionable. We need to address this." That was the moment everything shifted. The room erupted with whispers, nods, and murmurs of agreement. Mrs. Parker's shoulders sagged, realizing her grip was slipping. Then, a new voice, Mrs. Rodriguez, the quietest neighbor, stood up, clutching a folder. "I've been keeping records too," she said softly. "And I found more than just favoritism. I found cases where homeowners were fined without proper notice, where rules were applied inconsistently, and where some violations were ignored just because Mrs. Parker liked certain people." The room grew heavier with each word. People looked at each other, some nodding. Mrs. Parker's confident facade was cracking. "Enough," I said, voice rising just enough to command attention. "This neighborhood deserves transparency, fairness, and respect. We're not going to accept being bullied anymore." The neighbors started to speak up, sharing their own stories, times they had been targeted unfairly, fines they'd paid without explanation, threats they'd received for small things. The collective anger was palpable, but so was hope. We realized that we were stronger together. Mrs. Parker tried to regain control, but her voice was drowned out by the growing chorus of voices. The neighborhood was waking up. We weren't just a collection of houses anymore. We were a community ready to stand up. And then something unexpected happened. Mr. Evans, the quiet board member, looked directly at Mrs. Parker. "We're going to have to review your position as HOA president," he announced. "Based on these findings, I believe an investigation is necessary." Mrs. Parker's face went beet red. She opened her mouth to protest, but no words came. Instead, she clenched her fists and sat down, defeated. As the meeting drew to a close, I felt a surge of relief. We had pushed back, not with anger alone, but with facts, unity, and a refusal to be silenced. The neighborhood was finally taking control of its own destiny. But I knew this victory was just the beginning. Mrs. Parker wouldn't go quietly. She would fight, retaliate, maybe even try to turn neighbors against each other again. I could feel her eyes burning holes into me from across the room. Later that night, I sat alone in my backyard, staring at the sealed pool that had become a symbol of our stand. I thought about how far we'd come, how a small act of courage had sparked something powerful. And I made a promise to myself. I wouldn't let her or anyone like her crush our neighborhood spirit. We'd keep fighting, together, because sometimes the only way to win is to stand firm and never back down. Mrs. Parker's eyes widened as she realized her hold on the neighborhood was slipping. The room was buzzing with voices, neighbors finally, speaking up, and her carefully crafted empire of rules crumbling before her. She tried to protest, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she looked around desperately, searching for a way to salvage what was left of her authority. But the room had turned against her, fists raised, voices loud with anger and frustration. Suddenly, Mr. Evans, the quiet board member, stepped forward, holding up a thick folder. "We've reviewed the bylaws," he announced, voice calm but firm. "And it's clear that many of Mrs. Parker's actions are not only unfair but also potentially illegal. We're going to launch an official investigation. Effective immediately, all pending fines are suspended until we resolve this." Mrs. Parker's face flushed crimson. "This is outrageous," she spat, trying to regain control. "You can't. Just dismiss me. This neighborhood needs order. I've been doing what's best for everyone." "No," a neighbor interrupted, voice steady. "You've been doing what's best for yourself, Mrs. Parker. We've had enough of the favoritism, the unfair fines, and the constant intimidation. We're tired of living under your shadow." A murmur of agreement spread through the room. Someone else raised a hand. "We've all been afraid to speak out, but no more. It's time for transparency and fairness." Mrs. Parker's shoulders sagged. Her carefully built facade was cracking wide open. She looked around, realizing she'd lost her grip. For the first time, a flicker of fear crossed her face. She was used to being the one in control, the one who dictated the rules. Now everyone was looking at her with suspicion, and no one trusted her anymore. The room simmered with a new energy. Neighbors started sharing their own stories, times they'd been unfairly fined, threatened, or ignored. A woman from down the street recounted how she'd been fined for a garden gnome, another for putting up holiday lights before Thanksgiving. Every story added weight to the truth we'd uncovered. Mrs. Parker had twisted the rules to serve her own interests. Stepped forward, voice loud enough to be heard. "This neighborhood deserves better. We're not going to let one person bully us into submission. We're a community, stronger than any petty rule or petty tyrant." The neighbors nodded, some clapping, others just quietly relieved. Mrs. Parker sat silent, her eyes darting around, defeated. She knew she was losing her power. Her kingdom, built on favoritism, lies, and intimidation, was collapsing. Then, unexpectedly, Mr. Evans made a bold move. "Mrs. Parker," he said, "we're appointing an independent committee to review your actions and decide your future as HOA president. Until then, you're suspended from any decision-making." Mrs. Parker's jaw clenched. She looked as if she wanted to protest, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she slowly gathered her things and left the room, her shoulders heavy with humiliation. The meeting ended with applause and cheers. We had stood up finally and refused to be silenced. But I knew better than to think this was over. Mrs. Parker wouldn't go quietly. She'd retaliate, find ways to claw her way back into control. I felt that icy grip of uncertainty creeping in. What would come next? That night I sat alone in my backyard, staring at the sealed pool that now looked like a symbol of our victory. It was quiet, still, but I knew the calm wouldn't last. Mrs. Parker had shown her true colors. She was a fighter, and she wouldn't give up her throne without a fight. I remembered how I'd started this battle, how I'd refused to let her bully my family. I clenched my fists, feeling a fiery resolve. This wasn't just about the pool or the fines. This was about standing up for what's right, for fairness, for our community's future. And I knew one thing. We had awakened something powerful. The neighborhood had found its voice. We weren't just going to sit quietly anymore, waiting for another unfair rule, another threat. No, we would keep fighting, keep speaking out, and never let anyone like Mrs. Parker run over us again. Because sometimes the only way to win is to stand your ground even when it feels like the entire world is against you. And I was ready for whatever was coming next. I could feel it in my bones. The storm was just beginning. Mrs. Parker's eyes widened in horror as the truth sank in. She was finally exposed, her empire of favoritism and lies crumbling beneath the weight of our unity. The neighbors around her, once silent and fearful, now stared with fire in their eyes. No longer willing to be pawns in her game, they leaned forward, voices rising in anger and defiance. Then, unexpectedly, Mr. Evans, the usually quiet board member, stepped into the spotlight. With a steady voice, he announced, "Mrs. Parker, based on the evidence and testimonies, we are suspending your position as HOA president. An independent committee will review all your actions, effective immediately. All fines and penalties you've issued are null and void." The room erupted into murmurs and nods. Finally, justice was beginning to take shape. Mrs. Parker's face twisted with rage, but she knew she'd been beaten. Her shoulders hunched and she gathered her papers, storming out in silence, leaving a trail of stunned neighbors behind her. The once powerful woman was now a shadow of herself, defeated, humiliated. And yet, I felt a strange chill. This victory, though sweet, was just a beginning. I looked at my neighbors, my friends, and saw the fire still burning in their eyes. We had taken a stand, but the real battle was only just starting. Mrs. Parker was too proud to accept defeat quietly. She'd fight back, claw her way to the top again, and try to tear us down. That night I returned to my backyard, staring at the sealed pool that symbolized our rebellion. It was quiet but heavy with anticipation. I knew the storm wasn't over. It was only gathering strength. Mrs. Parker's retaliation would come soon enough. I could feel it in my bones, the quiet before the storm. But I also felt something else, an unshakable resolve. We had awakened a beast within ourselves, a voice that refused to be silenced. We had shown that a community united could topple a tyrant, and I knew we would never go back to silence. Suddenly, a thought struck me. What if this was just the beginning? What if our fight had opened the door to something even bigger? I remembered the countless injustices, the favoritism, the lies. How many more secrets did Mrs. Parker hide? How many more neighbors had suffered in silence? Without hesitation, I grabbed my phone and started drafting a message, my fingers flying over the keys. I reached out to every neighbor, every voice I could find, urging them to share their stories. The response was immediate and overwhelming. People started opening up, stories of unfair fines, intimidation, and hidden truths buried deep beneath the veneer of our idyllic neighborhood. The next morning I woke to a flood of messages, calls, and whispers. Our small rebellion had turned into a movement. We weren't just fighting for our pool or our property anymore. We were fighting for our dignity, our rights, and our community's soul. Mrs. Parker's empire was cracking, but the real storm was just about to break. And then, with a sudden burst of courage, I unveiled my plan. I had secretly collected enough evidence, photos, emails, legal documents to show that Mrs. Parker's actions weren't just unfair, they were illegal. I prepared a detailed report, ready to present it to the authorities, the media, anyone willing to listen. The moment arrived unexpectedly. News of our fight had spread beyond the neighborhood. A local reporter showed up at our community meeting, eager to tell our story. As I stood before the crowd, I felt a surge of adrenaline. I laid out every detail, every injustice, every abuse of power. I showed the proof, the photos, the legal documents, everything. The room fell silent as I finished. Then chaos erupted. Neighbors cheered. Some cried, others clapped. Mrs. Parker, watching from the back, started trembling, realizing her reign was over. The reporter nodded, then announced that authorities had opened an official investigation into her misconduct. The community had won, but the biggest shock was yet to come. Days later, I received a call from a high-ranking official, an attorney specializing in community disputes. They told me Mrs. Parker was under investigation for embezzlement, abuse of power, and even corruption. Her empire, built on lies and favoritism, was collapsing from within. She'd been caught red-handed, and there was no way out. In that moment, I realized something profound. We hadn't just fought for our neighborhood. We had ignited a movement that could change everything. Our community was no longer a silent, submissive place. It was a force, united and unbreakable. And as I watched the sunset cast its golden glow over our now peaceful neighborhood, I knew this was only the beginning. Mrs. Parker's downfall was a victory, yes, but it was also a warning. Power can be taken down by unity, truth, and courage. We had proved that, and nothing would ever be the same again. The neighborhood was transformed, not just by the victory, but by the awakening of something much stronger. A community that refused to be silenced. A community that would fight for justice no matter what. And I knew deep down, as I looked at the peaceful waters of our pool, that this story wasn't just about us. It was about everyone who ever dared to stand up and say, enough. Because sometimes that's all it takes to change everything forever.